everyone, and welcome to Security Insights, where the best practices of cybersecurity meets the real-world workplace. My name is Chris Goettl, Vice President of Product Management here at Ivanti for our risk and remediation products. And joining me today, Robert Waters. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Chris. Thank you. And happy belated New Year. And lots of vendors and analyst firms like to provide bold predictions for the upcoming year whenever the calendar turns over, right? But I think I can safely speak for both of us when I say we don't have any crystal balls and sadly can't see into the future.
Right. As comical as that sometimes is, to throw out some predictions and then look back and see how horribly wrong or off you were in some cases. Yes, absolutely.
Right. So instead of making any official predictions for 2025, I thought we could just do some pondering instead, not really tie ourselves down to any definitive statement. So here's how that's going to work. Basically, I'll pose some questions around unsolved problems in the security space as we enter this new year, or we already have entered, but just briefly. And you and I can then contemplate what the answers to those questions may be. So basically, instead of making any of those definitive declarations, we can explore a variety of possible outcomes for each problem that listeners may need to consider depending on their situation. Sound good?
Absolutely. Yes.
Cool.
I like it.
All right. Then without further ado, I'll jump right into question one. And that's who gets the upper hand from AI? Cyber adversaries or legitimate organizations? And I will let you start on that one.
So that's an interesting question, and I have some very fresh, recent examples of some of this. Just after January Patch Tuesday, we've seen some interesting things already in the news. First, though, I would say that in cybersecurity, there's always been the adversary defender, situation going on. And one of the themes that typically comes up is the attackers. They get to keep coming at us, and really all they have to do is find one chink in our defense, one broken link in the chain, one way to get in, and it's all over for us. That's kind of the if you go back to traditional network security, hey, we got to build up this wall of defense around us and figure out where each, point of entry is and defend that as well as possible. Well, we've kind of just progressed that forward. The same theme still exists. There's still the attackers. They hold the upper hand of they're out there in the shadows. We really don't know where they might come at us from, what direction they're going to come from next. We have to try to outthink everything they're going to do. And it's kind of an impossibility. If you listen to any of the security experts, they're going to say it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So what we need to do is we need to shift that mentality, as always, to the assume that they've compromised us in some way. What do we do next? I think AI is really the same thing. And there's already been some speculation of what are the types of attacks that we should expect. What are the benefits that we're going to be able to get out of AI? What are the benefits that threat actors are going to get out of AI? So a couple of examples. We saw the first, vulnerability in a CVE in an AI project last year. It was in Microsoft's Music project, Music as in Muse. And what this project is it's a way to take music, ingest it, and have the AI try to create music. It's trying to interpret other, pieces of media and try to replicate feeling and sentiment and mood and other things that music really is. So it's an interesting project and exploration of, music in general, but more importantly, there's a key part there, ingest. It's taking all of this media, bringing it in, picking it apart to try to understand it so that it can figure out how to generate something new. Well, that's exactly the type of vulnerability that threat researchers were already anticipating generative AI having a problem with. There's a need for it to build bigger and bigger models and use that to learn, adapt, and be able to do what it's supposed to do. Well, that was the vulnerability. They found a way to, the researchers in this case found a way to say, oh, hey, there's a vulnerability where on ingest of a music file, you could try to exploit a vulnerability. And that's what this particular team had to fix. So that was one good example. Threat actors looked at the way that generative AI worked, and they found a new kind of chink in that armor, a new, loose brick in that wall, and they went straight at it, right? All right, so fast forward to January. We've got a couple of new examples here in 2025. There is Microsoft actually had some challenges with malicious actors playing around in Copilot. So what happened was there was a threat actor group that developed a sophisticated software that exploited exposed customer credentials scraped from public websites. So Microsoft noted this, they observed this behavior, and they're doing some court filings around this. They've also beefed up some of Copilot's requirements and put additional safeguards and mitigations in place for this type of behavior in the future. So on that note, the attackers again found some ways to take Copilot and try to use it for their purposes. And it's requiring Microsoft, in this case as a vendor, to monitor that behavior, try to enhance their models and mitigate those risks. So we as vendors as well need to be very cognizant of how we're using technologies like AI and better defend against these types of attacks. Now, the last one is actually taking, one of the benefits to all of us from AI is we can augment our teams. We can take a moderately skilled person and improve their proficiency by maybe 20, 30%. Whether it's like a coder, they can have generative AI build them some base coding and then they can modify it from there. Or maybe it's a writer. You can, Robert, I know we've played around with this stuff. Writer AI is a tool that we've been using in our marketing team. You can have it write the bones or the kind of the skeleton of something, and you can go in and polish it up. It makes you more productive as a writer. The threat actors in this case found the same way to do that. There's a new ransomware group called FunkSec. The FunkSec ransomware, researchers have figured out that it's been developed by using AI. And there's a number of things in there, including some comments from the developer themselves that have indicated that AI is being used in there. But basically, the interpretation that I got from this article was that the researchers pegged this developer, this threat actor, as a moderate skill set. AI, though, has improved their ability to build up, ransomware, malware that they're using, the encryption methods they're using, even down to the way they're commenting and coding, documenting things within their code, all augmented by AI. They went from broken English to perfect English in the way that everything is documented out there. So when they shared their code, suddenly that code has much higher reusability and shareability amongst that community. So definitely seeing threat actors getting the same level of benefit that we're trying to get out of AI themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd liken this to a sports analogy, really, which ties back to what you started saying at the start of your comment, which is kind of offense versus defense. And apologies to any international listeners, but in American football, the offense lines up against the defense, and the offense knows the play they're going to run. And oftentimes they're trying to trick the defense with that play. And it's the defense's job to anticipate what that play might be and stop it using the personnel and the different schemes and plans they have. And 9 times out of 10, the quarterback throws the ball or they hand it off to the running back, and you've got a pretty good idea what they might be doing given the situation. But every once in a while, they come up with some new scheme or trick play that the defense or any defense has never seen before. Not to get way deep in the weeds, but there was this wildcat formation like 10 years ago that swept through the NFL. And instead of hiking the ball to a quarterback, they would move the quarterback out to a different position, like a receiver, or they'd be on the sideline and just hike the ball directly to a running back who would then usually just run the ball. And for like one season, this was a craze because defenses had never seen it before and didn't know what to do.
Right.
But by the next season, they had figured it out. They knew how to stop it. And now, like, once in a blue moon, you'll see a team run it. But it's not novel or really much of a benefit anymore. Things have come back to an equilibrium. And that, really, I think, plays into or proves out why adversaries perhaps are having the bigger advantage from AI right now, because they have this
novel.
Exactly. They have this ability to really come up with these new ideas that, our legitimate organizations can't anticipate. On the flip side, though, you did mention some great examples, but we're also seeing a lot where AI is being used to enhance existing attack types.
Right.
Namely, phishing is a big one. So yes, you might be going from having broken English in your phishing emails to perfect English, but if a company has defenses in place, mobile threat defense, whatever it may be, against phishing, then they still have a good chance of preventing, or if not preventing, responding, reacting quickly to those types of attacks, because they're just existing attack types that are a little more effective. But if you have those defenses in place, you should be in a good spot. And meanwhile, cybersecurity vendors also are developing products that leverage AI to better detect and respond, or detect and prevent or respond to attacks that might happen. And, products specifically are being developed that are intended to thwart AI attacks. So they're purpose built for preventing AI attacks. So I think, again, we're pondering, rather not predicting. Slight upper hand right now goes to adversaries, but I think we're going to see where, the defense, if you will, the legitimate organizations stay pretty close in this matchup and are able to thwart a lot of AI-based attacks moving forward.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, let's put a bow on that one and go to our second question. And that question is, will everywhere work be TKO'd by RTO, which is kind of a clever way of just saying, are we going to see a major shift back to employees working in the office, RTO, return to office, or will this everywhere work, flexible, hybrid, work from anywhere, anytime, work from home, whatever it may be, will that model continue to be the predominant model? And if you don't mind, I'm going to hop in first on this one.
Sure, go ahead.
So, there's the argument to be made that return to office is what's going to win out. The pandemic is over. There's no longer a need for everywhere work for most people. It's not necessary for people to be home for health reasons on a large scale. And there seems to be some momentum building around return to office. Lots of companies are doing it now. You're seeing it in the news every day. And it makes sense logically from a security POV. It's easier to secure your organization, secure your employees, secure your data when everyone is inside the perimeter, so to speak. That being said, there is an argument for everywhere work from the security perspective. Ivanti's 2024 Everywhere Work Report showed us that 80% of knowledge workers say flexible working, aka the ability to work anywhere, anytime, is highly valuable. And at least 40% would change jobs to gain flexibility. And most companies simply can't afford to lose 40% of their workforce, especially when you consider the fact that the people most likely to leave are those that are the most talented. Your top talent, your top performing individuals are going to have more opportunities to go elsewhere.
Right.
Taking that a step further, tying it into security, one could also argue against the conventional logic that says having employees on site is better for security by arguing that an RTO mandate could actually hurt an organization's security posture if it drives out all their top cybersecurity talent.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to give you a chance to respond. And if you could, maybe touch on some of the security implications for RTO versus everywhere work, which I think would be, an interesting part of this conversation.
Right. I think the remote work complicated things by the volume of people we had off network. If we were to rewind back to prior to COVID and say, hey, do we still have some of the same security concerns that we had during COVID? I think those occurrences were already there. We've got users who are going to be, you know, having to work remote for different purposes. So if I'm going to go out, as a product manager, I oftentimes get out into the field. I interact with customers. I go out and travel with the sales team and go out and engage directly in the field as well. When I do that, I'm working from the airport. I'm working from a hotel. There was one trip where I was working from a university cafeteria in between meetings at a customer site, and then I came back into the next meeting. But like literally jumping between those different types of work spaces, I think COVID or not, we still would have that level of need for different ways of securing things. The shift to cloud, the ability to work from anywhere needed, so we can enable our people to do their job more effectively. At the end of the day, I don't want people staying at the office until 9 at night. If I work for a global company, at the end of the day, I'm going to take my laptop home with me. I may get pulled into something late in the day. I might have to jump on a 9 p.m. call my time to meet with the Australian team at 8 a.m. their time. I don't know if the math checked out for that. I think it's more 6 p.m. my time, 8 a.m. their time. But you get the idea. So I think a lot of the security challenges would stay the same. It's the volume of things that really changed during COVID. So from a security perspective, I think the challenge of basically give-get, work from home or work flexibility is now a work perk. So security-wise, we still have to enable remote work, whether we go back to a hybrid or a full in-office operating procedure, because I guarantee you any executive level team at any company out there definitely has a flexible work schedule. So the people that we're most worried about from a security perspective are the ones who are going to be using that work flexibility regardless of which model you're in. Your salespeople will almost always be remote. Your executives are going to be traveling in places. So your point about talent retention is probably going to be the thing that's really going to be more important. Losing that talent because another company is willing to give them that perk. Security people and IT admins, they're going to have late hours, off hours. If they have to come into the work constantly, if that's a mandate, you will lose some of them because of the way that their job has to run. It's a 24/7 role in a lot of cases. When a threat actor attacks, oh, I'm sorry, it's the weekend. I'm sleeping right now. Those kind of things don't really, they're not as flexible in the security role, right? So that give-get over keeping talent, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges that either way you're going to end up with. So it's a good point.
Totally, 100%. And I think to sum it up, basically, yes, there might be more people working in offices more often than they were perhaps in 2020 through 2022.
Right.
But you're always at this point, just given the connected nature we're in today with laptops and smartphones and all sorts of devices, people are always going to connect outside the office. And so whether RTO or everywhere work is the predominant trend moving forward, you have to cover both from a security perspective.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Let's get to question number 3, and I'm going to let you go first on this one. And that question is exposure management, powerful force or passing fad?
Ooh, so for those of you who may not be as up to date on this, exposure management is kind of the next evolution in the vulnerability management space. We started out years and years ago with the vulnerability scanners. Your big 3 would be like Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7. Now there's a whole bunch of vulnerability scanners. In fact, there was an interesting comment thrown my way in a conversation with an analyst just a couple months ago, and that was vulnerability scanners have really become like your antivirus. It got to the point where everything's within 2% of each other. I care less about which vulnerability scanner I'm using. I may even use multiple. The challenges I'm having are more on how do I reduce false positives or false negatives? How do I get better prioritization? And how do I get to better clarity around what really needs to get done now versus what can wait till later? So that was the market challenge that led to kind of a stream of evolutions that we've been seeing here. There was the shift into risk-based vulnerability management that tried to tackle the problem of aggregating multiple vulnerability sources, prioritizing, and really getting context around not just an exposure. I can understand through threat intel, this exposure is actively being exploited versus this one is not being exploited. All right, so that tells me this is more important. Then I can take things like asset criticality and refine that process even further. So that was one stage. The next stage was really trying to get into what was referred to as CASM, Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. How do I get a better handle on all of my assets and the exposures across all of those? Well, if my vulnerability scanner is only seeing 70% of my environment, then what about the other 30%? What about those assets? How can I get a more complete view and understand what's out there? So now we're bringing in and trying to bring discovery in. And with that, being able to map vulnerabilities to assets when the scanners might not be the thing doing the assessment. So getting that type of collective view there. Then there was enterprise attack surface management. So that outside in view, what's publicly available. So each of these stages made this problem more and more complex while trying to solve the bigger challenge of getting a handle on all of my exposures and really trying to understand that life cycle and get towards remediation. So I think exposure management, I would put it very similar to what SASE has done in the network security space. We had the traditional network security products, and then you had Zero Trust and CASB and SWIG and a bunch of different technologies that were out there to solve parts of the overall problem of modernizing secure connectivity, right? We had to do it a better way. So this is the same type of challenge that's happening in the vulnerability management space. Whichever term surfaces here at the end, there's attack surface management, ASM, is kind of one group of analysts are calling it that. The others are calling it exposure management. The similarity between these things, though, is at the end of the day, they're trying to get to a platform. And that platform is helping me bring together all of these different pieces, all these different challenges in the vulnerability management lifecycle, and helping all of those things work together more closely. That doesn't necessarily mean one vendor to rule them all, but we're going to end up with an ecosystem that helps to bring together and helps me to solve all these challenges with a mix and match of some additional players in there to fill in gaps. And one important distinction there is it's not just vulnerability detection, it is through to remediation as well. So one of the things that's interesting about this evolution is it's crossing over not just some security boundaries and technologies, but also crossing over into the remediation side, which is the IT side of things, patching, configuration management, all of those pieces that need to happen within the IT side of things are also in consideration for coming into this larger exposure management platform. So the kind of bringing it back to your question, is exposure management, just the next fad, or is it something real? I think it feels like we're getting to that consolidation point. There might be some additional, pieces that come on board into exposure management over time as things develop. But I think exposure management is the culmination of we understand a critical mass of these challenges. Now, how do we bring it together to make it so we don't buy things 5 times to solve the big problem? We're being more effective, more economical about it, and also from an experience standpoint, reducing barriers, data siloing, and friction in that process.
All great points. to play devil's advocate, though, because we are again exploring all possibilities here.
Yep.
What I'm seeing a lot of, and you mentioned sort of the evolution from vulnerability management to risk-based vulnerability management, or RBVM, now to exposure management. I've been at this for a number of years now in the security space, in this vulnerability management, exposure management, what have you space. And RBVM has been around for quite a few years now, yet we still see so many companies still employ these old school vulnerability management practices. They prioritize for remediation using CVSS and those sorts of things. So it's like exposure management's here now, but people are, perhaps 2 steps behind. Then are they going to get with the times, if you will? It's a lot of the same messaging that was used for RBVM is being used for exposure management. But to line up behind you with your perspective, I think we've probably reached a breaking point. The current state of affairs has made exposure management inevitable or unavoidable even. The ever increasing quantities and types of assets and exposures that are out there today versus when vulnerability management first popped up, say 20, 30 years ago, it's a whole new world. And vulnerability management practices have failed to adapt accordingly. There's still this scan, patch, pray is the old adage, and that just doesn't cut it anymore. And really, with exposure management, there's a handful of RBVM vendors, and most are now making their way into this exposure management space. But analysts and vendors have really lined up behind exposure management in a way they never did for RBVM. I mean, we here at the Ivanti Solutions Marketing Group keep a pretty close eye on the exposure management market, and there are like dozens of vendors already out there. Last count, at least 60. I've seen counts in the hundreds, but ones that we've seen explicitly on their website, exposure management. They're planting a flag in that market. And a lot of analysts, from all the firms, all the analyst firms are talking about it. And so I think it has a lot of momentum. And kind of to your point, there's all these disparate parts that already exist. Your attack surface management, your RBVM, you have your validation components like red teaming and pen testing. All these things are out there. There's nothing new. It's just exposure management is basically saying, hey, these all serve similar but different functions, but are pointing towards the same goal. So let's bring them all together and make them more effective and make our lives easier. And yes, perhaps down the road, we're going to see new exposure management specific capabilities and technologies pop up. I fully anticipate that will happen here, within the next 12 months, probably. But that's not where we're at right now. And so, I mean, call it what you want, but I think exposure management, is here to stay and is frankly a critical step for companies to take if they're still employing these traditional vulnerability management methods. They're putting themselves at risk that way.
Well, and I think a couple of vendors coming in and really, there's going to be an ecosystem of vendors. There's going to be the ones that are trying to cater to the large enterprise and really bringing things together in a very complex way. And then there's going to be a set of players who are going to play in that mid-market to lower end of the market. They're going to be doing, if you look at things like the CIS framework, they brought a maturity matrix into that as well. Hey, control number 1. For a large enterprise, you should be doing these 7 things. For a mid-size enterprise, these are the 5 things you should be doing. For a small company, you at minimum need to be doing these 3 things. I think we're going to see that happen as well, even in the exposure management market. We're going to see some niche players coming in that mid-market and lower space, and they're going to be targeting let's bring in a much more mature than you're doing now, but not so complex that it's outside your skill set of your team or the capabilities of your organization. So we'll see it this will be a good thing even for that lower end of the market, I think.
Spot on. Yeah. Interested to see where things go.
Yep.
Finally, we got one last question, and I'm going to take this one first, if you don't mind. We've been going back and forth in case you couldn't tell. And that question is, which poses a bigger security risk to organizations, IoT devices or third-party vendors?
Yeesh.
And I'll be quick because actually I'm looking at the clock. We've been chatting a while here, so I'll be quick and toss it to you to bring us home. And I would say the argument for third-party vendors as a bigger security risk is, unlike IoT devices or any other kind of device, third-party products and software are largely outside your control. You can have certain security controls in place to try to prevent issues arising from those third-party products, but you're not coding them. All that other stuff is on the vendors you're purchasing them from. On the flip side, the argument for IoT devices as the bigger security risk is that if you don't know about them, what difference does it make whether they're in your own environment or not?
Yeah.
And with that, I'll toss it to you.
So IoT, absolutely going to continue to be a security concern. It's going to continue to throw, there's going to be more sensors on things. There's going to be more, out of the box encapsulated devices that are kind of like, hey, here, plug this in, boom, it's ready to go. Yes, we're going to see the billions will continue to proliferate. I think from a straight up security perspective, though, your point is absolutely correct. And here's why. If I'm dealing with IoT through network segmentation and, managing traffic and, access and things like that, I can make it so that IoT devices that don't give me a great way to secure them, we can mitigate ourselves by just separating it away from the critical parts of the business, right? That's a much easier problem to solve than, hey, I've got this component in my software called Log4j. I think we all remember Log4j. Boom, it's got the security vulnerability, and now we suddenly have this huge, prolific exposure across the industry that we can't just solve by, oh, hey, Log4j, they released an update. Everybody go patch it. Well, no. You got to wait for this vendor to patch it, and then you got to wait for this vendor to patch it, and this vendor to patch it, and this vendor to patch it. And that supply chain concern is definitely, from the examples we've seen in the past couple of years, oh, hey, Philips light bulbs, they got used in a major widespread DDoS attack. Okay, let's figure out how to segment stuff like that away. If we see bad traffic coming from them, network rules to shut that down. That's pretty simple. Something like Log4j, where we found out how little control we really had when a vulnerability like that popped up in components that are most critical middleware and management layers of our networks and software and applications we're using. Yes, I would say third party is definitely the bigger risk, and where you're going to have a lot more time and effort needing to be put in to maintain that. Now, there will be some IoT devices that you won't be able to just take the simple approach. Those will take a little bit more care in bringing into the more sensitive parts of your ecosystem. But that's a challenge that's easier to maintain as long as you've got visibility into it. Where third-party risk management is definitely one where we've seen a lot of companies having to ramp up the amount of time, effort, and maturity on their vendor risk management programs to get a handle on that.
100%. And that brings us to the end. And I have to say, I think we're guilty. We started out saying we're not making any predictions, any definitive declarations, but we definitely fell into certain camps on each question in terms of where we thought things were going to go. So sorry if that upsets the listeners, but we were just going off the cuff and figuring it out as we went along, and here we are. So with that, Chris, why don't you take us home?
All right. Thanks, Robert. And thank you all for joining us here on another episode of Security Insights. And as always, feel free to share the episode if you liked what you heard. We'll be back next month with an all-new cybersecurity topic for our loyal listeners. Until then, stay safe.